we have, you can't can hear me, right? Teacher, oh sorry, okay. We have with us Leo Saldanha and Bhargavi Rao of Environment Support Group, and they are going to talk to us on biopiracy, biodiversity, conservation, and food security in India. They both coordinate the group, Environment Support Group, and are committed activists in the areas of environmentalism and social justice, and their efforts have been recognized by US-based Association for India's Development. Leo has been actively engaged in and has contributed to issues related to environmental law, human rights development, decentralization, urban planning, and his activism in these areas has further guided his contribution to environmental and social justice, such that his efforts have actually impacted the legislation in India. He's an author as well. He has authored a book called Green Tapeism and has written numerous articles for mass media, newspapers, magazines, as well as scholarly journals. He also presents at several workshops, both internationally and nationally. And his engagement and contribution to the fields, as I said, has been internationally recognized as well. And Bhargavi brings to us and this presentation a very rich background in research, teaching, as well as coordinating the activities that the ESG, the Environment Support Group, plans. She has planned, facilitated, and presented at several awareness and educational related workshops for affected communities as well as for students. She has worked at Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore and also at BMS Women's College. She has also been a high school teacher at the Aurobindo School. So we have, and they have done much more that we can't, I don't want to take too much time from them, but there's a website, I'll put it down. There's more information about the group, their work, and their own contributions on the website. So with no further delay, I'll throw it open to you. So we have combination of students and few faculty over here, and they both are from education development.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. The way we're going to do this presentation is I'm going to present a few issues, and then Bhargavi will present some other issues, and then we'll have a discussion. So broadly, we want to touch, basically we want to touch on the first two dimensions. Firstly, we want to touch on the first two themes of this presentation, and perhaps through your questions go to the third theme of food security. We have made a few statements, and just want to check with you if you agree with them. Especially the first one. Do you agree with the statement? And if you agree with them, why? Because I want to counter-argue and see who is right. Which is, okay, we didn't put nature. We're really looking at resources. Nature is beyond any constitution. It cannot be bound by a constitution. When you drill a bore well?
I have drilled oil wells.
Okay, oil wells. Well, but when you drill a bore well and you get water, currently the Easements Act says that the water belongs to everyone and you have a right to tap it. And what is not monitored in that, what is not regulated in that, allows you the right to actually exploit it commercially also. So which has led to over-exploitation. Now, even oil, the only difference between mineral resources and other resources which are life-sustaining is that life-sustaining resources are not directly controlled by the state, right? Mineral resources, there are specific acts like the Mines and Minerals Development Act, which tend to come in and give a certain series of guidelines which regulate the access to that mineral, which is why when the Reliances and other big companies came to exploit mineral wealth, there was a very important amendment to the Mines and Minerals Development Act. Prior to that, only the public sector institutions could access those minerals. So that is the step that liberalization has taken in terms of allowing access to minerals. Prospecting licenses were given to foreign multinational companies. They were given at a price, they were sold, and then eventually it became a kind of a commodity, where you have to actually establish the extent to which that mineral exists in that deposit, and then you trade, and then a certain license fee is arranged. Yeah, there are other restrictions. Yeah, you have to set it to the government, so it is regulated. But what is behind all this is the fact that the government acts as a custodian. And as a custodian, it regulates the nature of the use of the resource. For instance, the river, water flowing in a river belongs to everyone. But the government is empowered under the Constitution to regulate the sharing of the waters, either under the state list or the concurrent list or the central list. So the basic understanding of natural resources, it does not actually belong to the government. It belongs to the people, right? But it's a common misconception that, forest department land belongs to who? Huh? That's a normal thing, right? Forests belong to the government, right? So 33% of the land belongs to the government, correct? You agree? Okay, 21, 31, 41, whatever. Yeah. Right, whatever. That belongs to the government. Any disagreement with that? No? Okay, let's put it this way. This is part of your education, isn't it? You have been educated to think like this, correct? Yeah? In fact, what's surprising is I visited over the last couple of years a village called, some villages in Jagat Singhpur, where there is an active resistance against the POSCO project. I asked the same question. You know what? Just guess what the response was. I said, who does the forest belong to? Huh? Sorry? They said, Amara hai. Why is it that you are coming with a totally different opinion? I mean, there was no disagreement with your statement in this group of people, right? And you've come across the country, I believe. Right? You're not all from Bangalore or you've come from across the country. So there's a very great diversity of representation here. So wherever you go, our education is a kind of indoctrination of the false position that the government owns assets. The government owns resources, that natural resources belong to the government, that forest land belongs to the forester. I mean, so much so the arrogance of the department is such that they have become so territorial, right? And you're aware of the Forest Rights Act, which was passed recently, about 2006, after a long struggle, decades of struggle. In fact, beyond independence, the struggle continues because the real independence did not reach many people. At least 30% of the population did not become independent on 15th August 1947. 30% of India's population, because that was a tribal population. They were controlled by special laws which are known as the forest laws of India. And the forest laws of India in 1947 were far more draconian than the one which we now use. Because forests were seen as assets of the colonial empire. And they were meant to be exploited. And forests were seen for the timber and the wood value and not necessarily for what they are. The movement against that was not part of the political movement which was dominant in the independence movement. There were some parts of it, like Mahatma Gandhi speaks about it. Nehru did not really worry so much about it. But the man who really worried about it is, we'll come to it in the next slide, is Ambedkar. Because Ambedkar came from a totally different tradition, totally different experience. Because he came from the wrong side of society. Now we are talking about 42% being malnourished, right, of the children. But we are talking 60 years after independence. Now Ambedkar lived in a period 3-4 decades before independence. And if you read some of his writings, some of the types of things he did, Gandhi suffered racism at the hands of a foreign race in a foreign country. I mean, he was discriminated by the whites in a black country, in a predominantly black country, correct? But for Ambedkar, the racism was with his own people. So it was far worse, you know. So when he looked back at it, there's a very interesting essay he writes about the lake, or the tank as we know it. And he writes and says, even the cattle of the lower caste is allowed to drink water from that, but not a lower caste person. So just try to figure out what it means to be a Dalit in that background in terms of accessing a common property resource. But the same Dalit is required for his labor. You know, you need me not because I'm a person, you need me because I have certain information or certain labor qualities. You don't recognize me as a person, you don't respect me as a person. And this had been going on for a long time. Now, therefore, the problem of resource, firstly we have to problematize that issue. You can't just say resources belong to everyone. It will be a very stupid statement. Because if I made that resources belong to the people, now people is not everyone. In a kind of system that we are in a society which is highly diverse and extremely divided, and where caste, class dimensions and feudalism also play major roles, in addition to which you have administrative systems which control access to those resources. So it becomes a very problematic relationship. So for the people in the Jagat Singhpur area who actually do not have any titles to the land which is being acquired, which is forest land, to claim that the land belongs to me may seem like a very audacious statement. Right? So I'm dwelling on this point because there is a lot of unlearning we need to do. Right? You are in your postgraduate level and look at the common statement that we made, that it belongs to the government. Forest land belongs to the forest department, right? And these are very simple statements, but they have very brutal impact on people who actually depend on the lands. For instance, I'll give an example of what happened in 2007. There was this Naxalism and it was sweeping through central India, and a report was called for. And Shivraj Patil was then the Home Minister. He was not like Chidambaram, he was more honest. Chidambaram has this smug look on his face and he knows everything and so on. But Shivraj Patil was more interested in his shoes, polish and this and that. I don't know if you know, but he should change his suits thrice a day. Okay. So anyway, that was, he would like to look natty and all that. But apart from that, he was sincere in terms of presenting to the parliament what the real picture is. There's a report he presents to the parliament in 2007. And he says that 47% of India's geographical area is disturbed, where the state really has no control over that area. 47%. Please download that report from the parliament website, it's there. Okay? And this is under the control of what we call broadly Naxal. Right? But the report goes into details, into many of the details why people took the stand to turn violent. And one of the dominant reasons is people feel disenfranchised. They feel that this country is not serving their interests. They feel that the government through its instrumentalities is not working for their benefit. Rather than working for the people's benefit, the government is actually working as an agent for certain corporate empires. So it goes into many details and it essentially targets two areas, the mineral exploitation in the central Indian region and the forest exploitation. For decades, the forest exploitation was such that the repeated displacement due to deforestation or dam building. And then what's worse, came the mining, both by the public sector and also by the private sector. For decades, the Coal India Limited mined areas, or Jadugada, for instance, is under uranium mining, which is done by public sector mining. Singareni is, coal mining. So if you see these places and you try to imagine what forest cover was there, this was thick, dense forest, right? So the people who got displaced had memories. They had imaginations of what they had lost, right? And they were just living in a kind of a, you suddenly wake up somebody from a dream or is sleeping and you wake, he's disoriented. They are living disoriented lives. Because so intricate was their connection with their natural system, with nature, with forest systems, that they suddenly felt plucked out. And that is repeatedly happening. And thankfully, this report goes into all these details. It just doesn't stay, it was actually to look at security perceptions. also looks at the kind of quality of life people had. Why I'm sharing this is because if 60 years after independence, a Home Minister of the country comes and admits that close to half the country is not under the control of the state, right? I think it's a very important statement. It's just 2007, and 2007 to 2012, nothing changes in India. It's probably worse now, right? Anyway, the point here is that this consciousness that this country belongs to the people is also evident from we the people who give ourselves this constitution, give ourselves this government. Okay, this argument became very interesting when this this Anna Hazare movement, when Falli Nariman was asked, can the people dictate to the parliament in terms of what law is required? And the parliamentarian's claim was that lawmaking is a preserve of the parliament. It's a very interesting question. And he recalls, for our public memories, the first three letters, we the people give to ourselves. So he said, if you don't understand that, everything goes. Okay, and he's actually a corporate lawyer by and large. Okay, he has argued on the other side most of the time. When it comes to a public issue, he had the, sagacity to actually make that statement that we the people is the foundation on which everything else stands. So we the people give to ourselves a government to help us manage these resources. That's how it should be read. So as I said, Forest Department has arrogated, Mines Department has arrogated to itself various powers. Theoretically, you can contest it, right? In practical terms, you cannot. Because if you go to the court and say, look, it's my coal, and Coal India Limited is mining, the judges are likely to ask, what other mechanism can you provide to me so that we actually have a rational way to use coal? So you can't come up with a thing. More recently, there is a new policy which is coming up that 26% of the resource which is found in an area. Suppose, let's say this is a village and you find gold underneath, right? And let's say De Beers wants to come and mine it because foreign companies can mine. Then the new proposal is that 26%, if I'm right, of the gold found should be shared with the community which lives there. So in that sense, it also answers your question that if you are mining oil, 26% should go back. If you go back to the US tradition of mining, yeah. So in a sense, we are moving towards that direction. So what it really tries to do is that people who own the resource will be much more prudent in exploiting it if they know they have a stake in it, right? But we'll go into those arguments later, a little later. When you monetize natural resources, what are the risks we run? Okay? But broadly this is true, and therefore there are struggles and movements which are trying to reclaim control. A more recent one is the Forest Rights Act, which is a result of decades of struggles and movements, several of them violent. 2002, I don't know if you recall, Muttanga, there was actually a very, very, very terrible clash. If I remember, 15 or 20 people were shot dead by the Kerala police. And there are videos. If you have the, if your art is strong, you can watch them. They were actually brutally shot dead. People who went to resist went with bows and arrows in Wayanad, which is not too far from here. Okay, and the way in which they are beaten, way in which this is a conflict which has gone on for a very long time. It just didn't start after post-independent period. It's been there in the colonial period and also the pre-colonial period, right? This whole contestation of natural resources has many histories. If you go from Karnataka to Tamil Nadu, it will have a different history there. So we need to acknowledge the complexity of these type of relationships. And it is not just that in India this is the problem. It's been the problem in Europe, also North America. And if you want to understand the problems of North America in terms of how they commodified forests and then kicked out native communities, especially Native American communities, and also post-colonial settlers. These are people like, white people went and settled down and they also became criminalized by the Rockefellers and others who became large landholders. How Yellowstone National Park got done. There's an interesting PhD thesis-based book called Crimes Against Nature. And since you are in that field, I think you should try and, if your library doesn't have it, you should try and get a copy, by Carl Jacobi. I think he now teaches in Brown University. I find that book extraordinary because it goes into the history of colonizing natural resources, of divorcing people from the resource, of attacking the relationship between people and resource, right? and traces the history to India. In fact, India was the model based on which forestry operations were practiced in United States. And we also borrowed from Germany, for instance, pre-war Germany and so on. So there are all these very draconian mentalities that have been driven into the forest system. And I wouldn't be wrong if I said to a large extent the forest department is also responsible for the Naxal problem and the fact that so many millions of people feel disenfranchised, not just the irrigation department or the agriculture department. Now, Ambedkar primarily wrote the Constitution. I say primarily because I read a couple of articles on or papers on how the Constitution was drafted. It was drafted by a committee. Essentially, this man did a lot of the work. Okay, and this is Article 39. The state shall. This is part of what we call the chapter relating to directive principles. Directive principles. Okay, they are not binding on the state, but the state is actually expected to follow them. Right now, if you were to say this should be the way you do it for the state, it makes it very rigid. Right? You also have to give some flexibility to the state. So, what Ambedkar did was, in the directive principles, and I would now argue that given the kind of scandals that are going on, you should have actually put it in the mandatory, duties of the state. But he had probably a more positive view of the India that was going to come. Firstly, of course, nobody argues with that. Men and women equally have the right to an adequate means of livelihood. You see, many constitutions don't have women there. Even the American Constitution did not have that. Okay. For instance, the adult franchise came much later. It took them about 200 years to get, women also the voting rights. In 1910, 1920. So you can see, that the trajectories are so different. Part of the independence movement was the realization that if you don't entrust men and women equal rights, then the movements will collapse. You see? So whether it was tactical or whether it was based on the core understanding of rights is a different matter, but that was how it was. The second thing is what is interesting to our, important to our presentation today. Ownership and control of material resources of the community. It doesn't say state. Right? Are so distributed as best to subserve the common good. Ownership and control, see, it uses the word ownership and control. These are very strong words when you speak from the perspective of the Constitution. Of material resources, not living resources. Not plants, not animals and so on. Material resources, right? Of the community should be distributed as to subserve the common good. And then he goes on to say, operation of the economic system does not result in the concentration of wealth and means of production to the common detriment. Now, this was written in 1948 or 49 or whenever, and we adopted it in 50. 60 years later, what have we got? Exactly the opposite of this. Right? Very few billionaires have actually set up universities. In fact, there is probably nobody except probably Premji himself. Right? I'm not saying that because I'm here, but I'm just saying it's a fact. There are 38 billionaires in India, and I recently was in Delhi and I heard Professor Dipankar Gupta, was a sociologist there, was saying Japan's per capita income is far higher than us. I don't know what the numbers are, but many times more. But the richest Japanese is the 10th richest Indian. Okay? And this is the declared wealth of the Indians. So what is happening is the natural resources have been so cleverly commodified and accessed by a particular elite group in India. And that elite group is managed to secure all the benefits to itself and monetize it. And when it becomes difficult to keep it here, they also have routes to take it out. Right? So there is this whole thing of Swiss bank accounts, British Virgin Island accounts, and so on. Right? So I mean, the numbers that we now speak of in terms of mining scandals and so on are just, you just can't wrap your head around it. I don't know what you can do with that kind of money. Right? So, and you know what they can do if you have so much money. Some of the people who did that in the assembly the other day, you get distracted. You don't even take that sacred as sacred anymore. Right? That's probably what is the result of having that kind of money. Now, we are part of this major movement called globalization, like it or not. It has started over the last 20, 30 years. Different countries have had different periods when they bought into this. But what is interesting is that when India bought into this whole thing, the major requirement was it should have high growth rates. The economic growth rate should be high. The sluggish so-called Hindu rate of growth of 2% is not sufficient, and we must have a very high growth rate, and the only way we can do it is to invite foreign direct investment. Now, it's one thing to say foreign direct investment, but it's another thing to operationalize it, because the entire architecture of India's law and policy, was so put together to do most things with the public sector. So you have to change the whole thing. You have to rebuild that palace. You have to rebuild the entire infrastructure, legal infrastructure. Many things were done. Okay? Between 1991, when it was officially made part of the budget, but really many of the features of the globalization were there before in Rajiv Gandhi's era itself. And even perhaps, in fact, one of the arguments that we have is when Indira Gandhi, who is credited to have saved the Silent Valley, okay, was Prime Minister by, I would say, default and an act of state terrorism, the emergency period. What she did was she sold Kudremukh forest to the Shah of Iran. Okay, she did not look at the forest. She is credited for saving Silent Valley, right? But nobody talks about this other side, the dark side of Indira Gandhi's so-called environmentalism. She gave 40 square kilometers of Kudremukh forest, which was right in the middle where Tunga and Bhadra rivers originate. Okay, and Netravati on the other side, it flows into the Arabian Sea. That area to Kudremukh Iron Ore Corporation, and the basic purpose of that company, which was public sector, was to pelletize it and export it to the Shah of Iran. Why? Because she wanted $620 million. There was a BOP crisis, balance of payment crisis, and as a result, you know, for all the constitutional objectives, you know, and the other laws that were there, during emergency, everything was suspended. And we have actually studied the decision making between 76, 77, when all these decisions were taken. And she signs an agreement with the Shah of Iran. Nobody to ask her. Quietly done. T.C. Alexander, for instance, you know, who was otherwise considered honest. He was a private secretary at that time. He is the person who actually worked on commodifying this resource. Tragically, what they did not realize was this was the source, or they did realize, but they still did it, was this was the source of two major rivers that drain most of, you know, Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. So you're risking millions of livelihoods for the sake of $650 million. So, you know, sometimes political expediency takes many dimensions. And trading away our natural resources is probably the most glaring examples of its adverse impacts. But in the post-liberalization phase, when Vajpayee was the Prime Minister, and Arun Shourie was, do you know which ministry he did? Huh? You're saying investment, you're saying disinvestment? Huh? Can there be a ministry of disinvestment? Yeah? Arun Shourie. Yeah. Can there be one? I mean, if any country in the world had Ministry of Disinvestment, what would you think of that country? Something is wrong upstairs, right? We actually had that. So he was Ministry of Disinvestment. And the patent purpose of that was to disinvest from public sector. You know, and many of the captains of the software sector and, you know, other sectors and all that were very happy that we had the Ministry of Disinvestment. I remember some of the, you know, when Arun Shourie came to speak, once he spoke in town hall, I went to it, and kind of fanfare with which the industry greeted him. Right? I mean, short of embracing him, everything else happened. Because he was really doing everything right. Finally, we feel like we can breathe. We were suffocating. We were like, you know, pressed down into the water. Now we are coming out. Ha! Fresh air. Right? Now, that was the expression. But you know what Arun Shourie did when he was minister was, he set up a committee under a man by the name, you know, Govindarajan. He had retired as Commerce Secretary. And the task, which was very quietly given to him, was to handpick people who he trusted and entrust to them the job of going around and finding the type of laws which are suffocating industry and foreign direct investment. And that was done by the committee over 2 or 3 years and finally officially accepted based on a PowerPoint presented to Vajpayee in 2002. The report is thick. It did not go to Parliament. It went only to the cabinet. Vajpayee saw it, he thumbed the desk and it became official. And the report was not put on India's government's website because at that time it used to monitor the government website regularly. It was not there on any of the government websites. It was on the Ministry of External Affairs website in UK. So if you went to check on visa and this and that for the UK, you found this document. And Google was not very prevalent then. I used to use a tool called Inquirers. Okay, I mean, remember this. This is 10 years ago, we do not have Google, right? So how would you find a document? Unless somebody told you, the document is on the Ministry of External Affairs website, please download it. When we downloaded it, it was shocking. And what they have done was gone with a tooth comb into every law of the country and found out those sections, provisions, chapters, whichever was blocking foreign, take it out. And the first two major recommendations they made was forest clearance and environmental clearance systems are choking foreign direct investment. You have to liberalize it. So subsequently came the national, and what they did also after that was the committee got disbanded, the report was, and these people who are in the committee were all senior bureaucrats. They were sent to the same key ministries, Ministry of Water Resources, Environment and Forests, and so on. My favorite guy is Pradipta Ghosh. He is now the climate advisor to Pachauri and to the Prime Minister. The other hidden truth is we have done through RTI is that he actually shuffled a lot of money when he was Secretary Environment to Terry, and Terry made him a senior fellow. It's we're going to put it all out. The point is we need to talk about it. This is a kind of corruption, right? I want to ask, ESG is not Terry, I know that. Right? We also apply for grants. We got 5,000 rupees from the Ministry of Environment over the last 15 years. That's all. And they get 300-400 crores. So it's not like we don't do as much work as they do. We do a lot, right? So the point is it's not just DSC and Terry as comparison. There are many other organizations to apply. They were all rejected. Terry got the money. We'll come to that later in terms of how Terry plays a role. But why this happened was when Pachauri was Secretary Environment, from the committee went to the Ministry of Environment as Secretary. Remember, Raja was the minister then, after Balu, right? What Pachauri did was he worked on two very key legislations. One is known as the Environment Impact Assessment Notification. Okay? And in the Impact Assessment Notification, there was some strength. He weakened it and made it investor friendly. Okay? And he said, people should be consulted, of course, but sometimes people cannot be consulted, and therefore it is in the public interest not to be consulted. That language is there. Now, just think about it. Can you write such law? You're talking about fundamental rights here, no? But he put major regulatory provisions not as part of rules or act. He put it as part of the notification, which does not ever go to Parliament. He showed it to Raja, Raja signed it, and we went through. In fact, we went and met Raja at that time. At the door was a man called Chandolia. You know where Chandolia is now? He's cooling his heels in Tihar jail now. Now, you can't believe it. I mean, these are the guys who actually were, and I can't believe that it is only telecom scandal. The scandal is actually in the MOEF it started. And it's all related to biopiracy later. But what he did later was also drafted the environmental policy, which is nothing but a window dressing for foreign direct investment. Please download the policy and read it. It tears away most of the, for instance, there was a policy on agriculture and forestry, which was written in the 50s, which was bad. And then in the 80s, we rewrote it. It was very good. It looked at forests as people's resource. They take away in the environmental policy. Who wrote the environmental policy? Terry wrote it. So the shuffling of money to Terry was all part of an overall, deal that, you guys do the work that I want you to do, and then later on I'll come and join you and we'll do more work. Similarly with the agricultural policy and the mineral policy. What we are now finding is that these policies are not being written by bureaucrats at all or by homegrown NGOs. They are being written by foreign multinationals. More recently, the darling is McKinsey. McKinsey is writing water policy, McKinsey is writing agricultural policy, McKinsey is writing even urban policy. I want to meet these people inside McKinsey and find out how many policies can you write. I mean, are these the same guys or are different guys? Right? How can you be an expert on everything? You see, are there any professors in this country? Are there any researchers? Are there any, network of people who know this country? You see? So, they must have got tired of Arjun Sen Gupta's and, Tendulkar. These are people who won't lie. Right? So, they went and, so these policies are written by them and they are heavily influenced by this. This is a World Investment Report of 2009, just released just before Copenhagen talks. And download that report, it's online. Bhargavi found it. She had the mental caliber and the patience and all that to, what is it, 500-600 pages? Yeah, and she found this in that. Government could promote contract farming between transnational corporations and local farmers in the direction of enhancing farmers' predictable income, productive capacities, and benefits from global value chains. It sounds like Nandan Nilekani arguing for UID. You just turn farming into banking sector and so on. It's the same language, However, to deal with the extensive adverse impacts, obviously there will be adverse impact because you're taking away thousands of years of relationship with farming systems and commodifying it. You're putting the TNC as a major broker, transnational corporation. And local farmers are what? They're not farmers anymore. They are contract labor. The word promote contract farming means what? Part of the basic philosophy of the independence movement was land to the tiller. Right? One of the stories I love to tell, but I don't have evidence to prove, is what I heard in National Law School when Lolaksha, a lawyer from Mangalore, was speaking. And he said the genesis of the Land Acquisition Act in 1894 is a certain requirement of a colonel who wanted to access land of landed classes who had thousands of acres. Because of the caste system, the upper caste had lots of it. The landless laborer had nothing. And when there was a drought, the granaries were full, but they were not being distributed. So he figured, like the PDS problem that we now have, was there 100 years ago. Okay, we seem to relive. It's just that we don't have that kind of landlordism. We have a different form of landlordism, right? Our PDS granaries are full, but people are still dying of hunger. There, it was evident. They were, and he describes it as these were merely skeletons with flesh and skin covering them. Think of Chengalpet district in the kind of 40 degrees heat there, people not having water. You've seen Tanneer, the film, right? You remember that film at all? No? Yeah. These are some films, which are useful to see again, revisit. But they actually document that kind of life. Now, these farmers, he realized, could actually have some sort of dignity and security if only they could own the land. So he wanted an instrument and he didn't find an instrument. And therefore, the Crown gave him the Land Acquisition Act in different forms. Eventually, it got codified as the Land Acquisition Act. So as students, if you can have access to some of the libraries which I don't have access to, perhaps you have access to the British library system, and maybe you'll find this document. Please email us because we want to know this. Right now, that is very important because if you look at the Land Acquisition Act today, what is the opening statement? It's not about giving land to the tiller. It's not about food security and all that. Jairam Ramesh says, to make sure land is supplied for industrialization and urbanization. That is why we need, that is his opening statement. Right? See the perversion that has taken place in terms of so-called reform. But that perversion is also influenced by this World Investment Report. This investment report actually put it out there because contract farming is now called climate smart agriculture. Climate smart agriculture. I was in Durban, and you must go and actually look at the conferences they had. And you will see this climate smart agriculture is repeatedly coming up, either hosted by World Bank or African Development Bank, or by WTO related institutions. Or it is some multinational company. It will be an agrobiotech company. Now, why are they so interested? Because land is locked in. And as long as land is locked in, you cannot practice your technologies. So you free up the land, make it contract farming, release it from the farmer's grip, and then make the farmer a stakeholder. These are very interesting but dangerous terms. You don't have rights as a stakeholder. Right? Your stakes are based on what? When you have a right, you and I are equal. When I'm a stakeholder, you and I are not necessarily equal. Right? So proportionate right. And that takes away the right itself. And exactly. It's another way of looking at it. But finally, the whole thing is you have to be part of this global value chain. This is very dangerous language, but written deliberately because this is the engine of the current economic pattern. Right? And then they go on to say the need for international community to devise a set of core principles, transparency in large-scale land acquisitions, respect for existing land rights. Of course, you have to write respect for existing land rights without operationalizing it. the right to food, protection of indigenous people. And see, all this is garbage. Once you have that, this goes. But you have to put it in. This is UN language, right? So see how the UN has become an institution. This is written, the World Investment Report is released by UNCTAD. It's a UN organization. And it has become part of this overall setup, which is manipulating the sovereignty of resources. The sovereignty of resources which belong to the people is now become a commodity for trade. And this is KiMoon Statement, if you want to read. Let me read it out if you can. Increasingly, transnational corporations are engaging with developing and transition economies. Developing and transition economy. You have to think of CIS. Okay? Through a broadening array of production and investment models, such as contract manufacturing and farming. Now it is also manufacturing, right? Service outsourcing, franchising, and licensing. These relatively new phenomena present opportunities for developing and transition economies to deepen their integration into the rapidly evolving global economy, to strengthen the potential of their homegrown productive capacity, and to improve their international competitiveness. Unlocking the full potential of these new developments will depend on wise policy making and institution building by governments and international organizations. Entrepreneurs and businesses in developing and transition economies need frameworks in which they can benefit fully from integrated international production and trade. Now, when you read this, what does it mean? This is the UN Secretary General. And let's come back to this later, the kind of speeches they make and all that. But broadly, the current mantra for growth. We should have an open door policy. One of the questions people constantly ask from most of the southern countries is, open door, our doors have to be open, your doors are shut. Right? What is Obama's campaign speech now? Don't export jobs. Right? So, that means and they are doing everything to make sure Indians don't go and work in the US. It becomes difficult, but they will try their best. At least politically and rhetorically they'll do it. The problem is they have gone through a phase of jobless growth. And the whole Occupy movement represents the flaw in that kind of capitalism. The acquisition potential of individuals is obviously not equal because they're stakeholders, yes. But there is disproportionate stakes and disproportionate access to wealth. Now this is okay as long as you're dealing with stocks and software and so on, but it's not okay when you're dealing with farming. Right? It's something else. Even if you're a small stakeholder in the stock market, you'll still have 3 meals a day. You may not have a car, but you'll have somehow or the other pay your loans. You may not have eat at swimming pools. In London, one of the criticisms is that most of the businessmen there and the bankers, they did a survey, Guardian did a survey, and they found that most of them, almost all of them, have eat at swimming pools. Yeah, it's not very cold in England, right? But still they have eat at swimming pools. The point is this, wealth accumulation, after a point it becomes a disease. You don't know what to do with it. You'll buy your yachts, build your palaces and all that. But you simply don't know what to do with that wealth. And that disease is now afflicting some of the 0.1% Indians. Okay, so therefore now a new thing, Murasali Maran wants to push for a road between Madras and Bangalore, in which, if you travel by which, you'll travel at 160. I was thinking, why does he want that road? You go on this road, it's really nice. There's a lot of farmland they have acquired. It's still not fully exploited. They already have another road which they are upgrading on the other side, from the North Bangalore side. Now he wants a third road. Someone recently told me he has a Ferrari. Should we finance this Ferrari craze? We have all these fancy cars now. In Delhi, when I went to a shop floor, I found that, a 4 crore car, people are driving around like it's Maruti cars. This is what we are seeing, and we have to be worried about it. You go on this road. We have fought a lot on this BMIZ road. You are sitting in wetlands, which is encroached. Let me remind you. Okay? This is encroached wetland. Yeah. All this is illegal. All this is illegal. We'll come on a different date and talk about this. Right? But this is what it symbolizes. So FDI should come in. Without FDI, we are going to die. Mobilize, and if the FDI comes in, one of the things we found, BMIZ project, very interesting. 12 banks, we were told BMIZ is a foreign direct investment. American companies are investing. Right? I remember Narayan Murthy having a signature campaign to make sure those idiots who are farmers who are blocking the project are killed. He didn't say kill. He said they are blocking progress. And he went to the Supreme Court through LCA. LCA is Electronic City Industries Association. Okay? Petition in the Supreme Court. 40,000 signatures. Almost everybody who was a software developer here or part of Wipro or Infosys or HP or whichever company is here signed up. All right? And people like us were saying, no, don't build this road because it's, illegal and this and that. We were ridiculed. Media wouldn't pick up our stories and so on. When we went into the financing of the BMIZ project, what we discovered was it was absolutely not an American project. Ashok Keni, who in my opinion is a thug, he's actually a thug because he's beaten Bhargavi and me up. Okay? Physically he has done that. So, therefore he's a thug, he's a criminal. He projected that image, right, which was false, brought one white looking guy, and it works, got an MOU signed, and after that the banking scheme that we finally got documents, they were actually stolen. We didn't have RTI then, so we had to steal documents. Those 10 documents, which is known as a due diligence report, when we read, each and every due diligence report was from an Indian bank, GIC, LIC, ICICI, MV Kamath was the kind of the key financier of that project. And what we discovered was this project was completely financed with our money. There's zero foreign direct investment. So if one of you is interested in economics of this project, please do come. We have all the stolen documents. We might, in fact, we scanned and put it online. They threatened us. We said, you threaten us. You threaten us with criminal defamation. We'll be happy for that. Because then you have to defend, no? Then I can make RBI the defendant. We filed a complaint to RBI. RBI backed out from that complaint. The lady who took the decision went on to become the deputy governor of RBI. I'm looking at the people who make key decisions here. Why do they shelter ICICI Bank? The whole thing was fraudulent. Governor T.N. Chaturvedi actually also established it was fraud. But it was dismissed. Anyway, as I said, BMIC is one day story for you. And one day you will have to call us back and we'll share the BMIC story for you. But what is dangerous that is evolving, and I'll stop here and then Bhargavi will take over, is the fact that not only do foreign direct investors use our own monies, but they're manipulating our regulatory system, technocratizing it. Towards the end, we'll talk about what that means. Technocratizing it means it is not representative. Right? Let me give you an example. You have heard of an organization called ABIDE? Association for Bangalore Infrastructure Development or something. Huh? Not Kasturi Rangan. That was a committee on reform of urban governance. That's a different thing. That's okay. That I have no problem with. ABIDE. You have heard of Bangalore Agenda Task Force? Janagraha, Nandanilekani, Pradeep Kar, right? You have to be a software developer. The next thing, if you are not a software developer or a software, tech guy, you have to be a biotech person, Kiran Mazumdar. After that, you are disqualified. And then, of course, architects are required. Now, they decided all these road projects that you have here. This elevated expressway was cleared by them. 900 crores was spent. Do you see the price tag on it? Like you wear a new shirt, you throw the price tag away, we have thrown it away. Who is paying for it? Now, this is the kind of questions students and researchers have to ask, in my opinion. That for me is education. And I'm throwing a challenge to you. But what they're doing is, BATF was not accountable to us. You could not ask questions to BATF because you didn't appoint them. They were not accountable to anybody but S.M. Krishna at that time. ABIDE is not accountable to anybody but Sadanand Gowda. You will say it's merely advisory, but any document you give, any project you give, you'll give it to ABIDE. You would not give it to the municipality. Because in the municipality there are 180 guys. Right? Even if it is corruption, it gets divided. Here only 5 people will actually advise you nicely and package it, and this is 900 crores or 600 crores, we'll never know. You see? So this is how the whole packaging thing. Technocratizing decision making essentially means corruption, building intransparency, building inaccountability. And who are these people? They are the ones who are talking about freeing the country from corruption. The hypocrisy that is building into the system. Right? We'll talk about technocratizing much later, as I said, in terms of the Biotechnology Regulatory Authority Bill, if we have the time. It's 4:15. So I think Bhargavi should take.
Out of my undergrad program, there were very few universities at that time offering environmental science. A few of us decided to do an undergrad in environmental science in the 80s, and we had very few places where we could go. But then already they had started introducing microbiology and tissue culture and things like that. And we were wondering why. Leo was talking about FDI and how that FDI has permeated every layer of our institution, universities, is very important. Then many of us were forced to do pure sciences in either botany or zoology. And even there, it's very interesting that the subjects that were offered as specialization were only tissue culture, biotechnology, or microbiology. And one or two professors who had, offered plant physiology and taxonomy in the past, they had not been given students because these new areas required, encouragement, and there was a lot of money coming into these new areas. And like I said, we were the third batch of students who passed out of environmental science, and we were 35 of us. 30 of us continue to work in the same areas, some way or the other. In the master's program, we were just about 15 students. Out of 15 students, 11 of them are in the biotech industry today. That kind of tells you what's happening in the country. So genetic engineering kind of had, taken birth in India, just like how IT took birth in the late 80s. BT took birth again around the same time, and it started kind of flourishing really well. And people like me who did botany were told that I will never have a future in that subject and I have to forcibly take microbiology. So I did try that for a few years, but did not want to spend the rest of my life sitting in a lab, so I moved away. But going back to what I learned became very interesting much later in life. Just to take you to a lab where genetic engineering is done. What is it that they do? You can take genes from any organism and put it into another organism of your choice to see those qualities in it. I don't know how many of you come from a science background. So this is the basic thing they do, and this procedure has got extremely simplified today over the years. And all the biotech students who have passed out have a job waiting for them as soon as they walk out of college today. So, and this is what is being employed by the big biotech industries. What Leo spoke about, the transnational corporations. One, they are not only looking at contract farming, they are basically talking of genetically modified foods and organisms. Seeds, basically. That's how they can completely take control of our seeds. And their pitch is, the seeds that you are using right now will not be able to sustain all the climate change and other challenges. The biotech seeds that we are going to come out with, the genetically modified genes, will be drought resistant, will be pest resistant, will not need herbicides, pesticides, so on and so forth. So they are promising a world to the farming industry and to agriculture. So if you just look at traditional breeding, in traditional breeding, they basically looked for good qualities of a fruit or flower. Say if it was brinjal, they looked at the size, the color, the taste, and they basically grew it in farms adjacent to each other and bred the harvest where cross-pollination has taken place. And the resulting fruit would have all these good qualities. And this kind of traditional breeding took place within the same species. It was not outside of the species. But what is happening in genetically modified seeds is you can incorporate genes from practically anything to anything. Humans can have any color hair, skin and eyes. The same way vegetables can have any color seeds. You don't want the skin because it is cumbersome to peel. You can make it thin. You want the skin of a particular vegetable to be thick. You can insert a particular gene which is responsible for bringing in thickness. Just look at what is happening and the international law. All the countries came together in 1992, and because the biodiversity across the world was being depleted, they said we will come out with some kind of a treaty, and then following that will be a in-country law to regulate and monitor the bioresources of the country. So this convention was signed in 1992. India also signed this convention, and the focus of the CBD itself was basically to conserve the biological diversity, ensure that the bioresources are intelligently used, ensuring that it will not be depleted completely, and then also to ensure that the local communities will get some kind of benefit out of it. So if you're taking some traditional knowledge and traditional species of something and commercializing it, you're going to ensure that those communities will be benefited, like Leo spoke about the 26% if you take gold or iron or oil. So similarly, even in case of bioresources too, the local communities would be benefited because they are the ones who have been preserving these varieties over hundreds and thousands of generations of farming. And based on that, India came out with its own legislation in 2002, which was called the National Biological Diversity Act. And the rules of the act came out in 2004, and the guidelines of this act came out by 2005. Let's just put that law aside and look at what happens if you and I plan to genetically modify something. How is the clearance process? See, first of all, the existing clearance process is under the Ministry of Environment and Forest, under a body called the Genetic Engineering Approval Committee. And that GEAC has been set up under the rules of the hazardous microorganisms transport and management and maintenance. Under that, it has been set up. And it is very insufficient and weak when it comes to genetically modifying the vegetables or fruits or other things. Then these laws, they do not conform to international treaties on the genetically modified foods. So there's a huge gap between the hazardous microorganisms maintenance and management rules and the international GM food rules. And more than that, they just don't conform to the constitutional provisions of the 73rd and the 74th amendments, which gives a lot of power to the local governments. And if you look at the clearance process, although agriculture is a state subject, the state has no say in it, and the panchayats have no say in it, the gram sabhas have no say in it at all. And even if trials are being done, GM trials, none of these local government bodies have any say in the matter. And information on GM crops or foods is not available on anywhere in public domain. And this whole process of GM crops actually requires a lot of public participation in the decision making. But public participation in this particular sector was removed when the environmental law got diluted. Leo was talking about environmental laws and the Govindarajan committee and all that. All that influenced on one side the environmental law dilutions to ensure industries coming in, not only the dirty industries which polluted, but also these kind of industries, so that public did not have much say in it. So the latest amendment which came in 2006 removed public participation from most decision making of both environment and agriculture related sectors. Then the clearance process, like I said, which is done by GEAC, is completely flawed. They actually have three bodies. One is the RCGM, GEAC, and one more body, which is actually controlled not by the MOEF, but by the Department of Biotechnology. So people who were in DBT are later on in GEAC, and people who are in GEAC are later on in committees of various other biotech industries. So that is how it has been. So clearance at the GEAC level is very easy. So if you apply with what bioresource you need and what kind of genetic modification you're going to come out with, within a month or two, they will go through your papers and give you a clearance. So let us just look at the brinjal case. How was brinjal taken? Monsanto, this is a very big project under the big flag called the ABSP2, Agricultural Biotechnology Sustainable Project, which is the second phase of the project by Cornell University. It is in collaboration with USAID, which is funding it. And then we have the Sadhguru consultants here in Hyderabad, which are into all kinds of biotech experiments in the country. Then they have very nicely lured the universities into it. We have the University of Agriculture Sciences, Dharwad, Karnataka. Then we have the Tamil Nadu Agriculture University, then also the Institute for Vegetable Research in Varanasi. All these three universities, a consultant group, USAID and Cornell University, have joined together along with Monsanto and its sister company Mahaiko. Mahaiko has a certain percentage of shares which are of Monsanto's. So you have totally 7 collaborators, and they have done an extensive survey across India to find out which is the vegetable that is mostly eaten, mostly liked by everybody. You know, if you go anywhere in India, it's easy for you to find Coca-Cola and Aquafina water bottles, but you will never find a tender coconut. Because we don't know their kind of marketing strategies. We are very poor. Whereas they've used the same principles here and done an excellent marketing survey and found out that the brinjal is the most widely eaten, loved, and cooked by people on an everyday basis. So based on that, they decided to take the brinjal. And what is very interesting is they got into this agreement, got UAS and the universities involved, and UAS and these other universities, they have the germplasm of all these brinjal varieties. So they very nicely took the brinjals from them, inserted the foreign gene, which is the Bacillus thuringiensis gene, which comes from the bacteria. They took the gene that was responsible for the toxin. So if I go back to that first slide that I started with, so what they did was this Bacillus thuringiensis itself is a soil bacteria. To protect itself, it produces a certain toxin. So the gene that was responsible to produce the toxin was isolated from the bacteria, inserted into the DNA of the brinjal, and it was allowed to grow. So now you have brinjal seeds that can produce the same toxin as the bacteria. And their claim is because the toxin is present, the shoot and fruit borers, which eat up a small percentage of the brinjal, will not be consuming the brinjals anymore, so the farmers can get 100% yield. So that is what they have tried. And they completed their experiments in the Mahaiko labs in Maharashtra. And it again went back to GEAC after a few experiments here and there across the country. The experiments that they did were very scattered. They were not peer reviewed. In fact, in one of the reports that they had given, they had tested these BT brinjals on rats. Out of 10 rats, 9 died. So that is the kind of experiment that they are relying on, and they produced the same thing to GEAC, and GEAC cleared the BT brinjal for commercial sale in 2009, October of 2009. And How did we get into this? This is a very interesting question. Although we had not directly worked with the agriculture sector like this, we've mostly worked with farmers who've lost land, where the environmental laws apply, or where the land acquisition laws apply. We really had not engaged in the agriculture sector like this. A group of farmers from the HD Kote region near Mysore, they came to us, and they were organic farmers who had already been hit by the BT cotton. They were growers of organic cotton, and it was extremely difficult for them to get organic cotton seeds. UAS Dharwad has just 1 or 2 varieties, and even those varieties, they don't grow very well. The harvest is very poor, and it's become extremely difficult because 98% of the cotton that is grown in the country today is BT cotton. And it is very expensive for farmers who are growing the BT cotton, and all of you know about what has happened with the use of BT cotton and farmer suicides and so on. So they came to us sometime in December of 2009, and they said, oh, you have to do something about it. See what is happening. Once BT brinjal comes, our entire vegetable and other crops that we grow will be taken over by these companies. So we started looking into all the research that had been done by many people. In fact, the farmers themselves brought us, huge bundles of papers of all these scientific evidences, health experiments, experiment on rats and rabbits and everything. Although most of us in our group come from a science background, there was very little that we could really make out of it. So while we were sitting and discussing, we said, okay, now let's just think of one basic question. Okay, all this science part is fine. It's going to either be harmful or it's going to be beneficial. But before somebody inserts a gene into something, to whom does the brinjal belong? So the same question Leo asked all of you. All of us said, the brinjal belongs to all of us. So shouldn't we be asked? Was the next question. So we started reading the law. And when we read the law, the Biodiversity Act, it is very clear that if anybody has to take any bioresource from the country, be it for such an experiment or even for some biosurvey studies or whatever, they have to take the permission of the respective authority. So if it is a foreign collaboration, it very clearly says it has to take permission at the NBA. The NBA was set up in 2002. By 2003, they were quite functional, and it is based in Chennai. And they had to take the permission of NBA, which is the National Biodiversity Authority. Or if just you and I decide to do some biosurvey studies, we have to take the permission of the State Biodiversity Board. And more importantly, the biodiversity management committees, which are at the village level. None of this had happened. So we read the law, and we also found out that there are other provisions in the law. For example, say the State Biodiversity or the Biodiversity Management Committee agrees to give a particular bioresource, and in case the company is going to make some kind of profit out of it, there is the provision for the access and benefit sharing of that profit too. So none of this had been looked into by the people who had accessed these bioresources. But at that point of time for us, we needed more confirmations because the public hearings were coming up. And as all of you know, once GEAC covered BT brinjal for commercial use, Jairam Ramesh, who was the then environment minister, he said he's going to take public opinion before giving a clearance to it. So he went around the country having public hearings, and I think he held 6 or 8 public hearings for the BT brinjal issue, and the Bangalore public hearing was getting very close to our research on this. It was just 2 days before the Bangalore public hearing. The Bangalore public hearing was on February 6th, and around February 4th, we still did not have clear, confirmation that they had taken permission or not. So we called up the NBA office in Chennai and spoke to junior officers, and the junior officers said, no, there has been no such application asking for permission of the brinjal. But legally, yes, they have to take permission. And they also said, see, law is only a guiding instrument. You know how law is not practiced in the country and all that. Then they said, don't quote us because we are all junior officers. You can speak to our chairman. So I took the number of their chairman and spoke to him, and he also confirmed that in Monsanto or Mahaiko or any of the concerned authorities, none of them had applied for any permission. And we also went through their website. We went through their website, leaving no stone unturned. We went through all their minutes of the meeting. And it will be so disappointing for you. The central authority in the country, which is supposed to look into all kinds of violations of the Biological Diversity Act, you cannot even imagine the kind of things that they have been discussing in their meetings. The board meets every quarterly or so every year. And in the 4 or 5 meetings in that particular year, they have not even spoken about brinjal when the entire country is, discussing brinjal. And instead, what have they been discussing? Whether they can buy furniture for their office and what kind of furniture, whether the members who come for the meeting can fix their dentures with the money, whether they'll get health reimbursement, so on and so forth. All such totally irrelevant things had been discussed. And those minutes are still there on their website. You should read it. It's hilarious. Yeah, it's all recorded in the minutes. It's there. No, they have not paid, nobody has probably read it in detail, when the authority who finally signs it. He must have just seen who are the members who were present and what were the final conclusions and just signed it.
There are organizations that don't allow these things to be recorded.
Yeah. So this just gives you how they function, with what seriousness they function. It's no different than what has happened in the Vidhan Sabha a couple of days back. So we downloaded all those minutes, fearing that they would remove it, but they're still there. And they have not even corrected those minutes. It's still as is. Yeah. So that was what it was. And I got a confirmation from the then chairman, who was Mr. Gautam, saying that brinjal has been taken without any permission. So that left us with a great piece of news, and we raised this in the public hearing in Bangalore. But at the public hearing, Mr. Jairam Ramesh put it aside. He did not listen to us. He in fact said, you're bringing in all irrelevant things into the forum. You're confusing the people and all that. But much later, of course, he placed a moratorium on it, but we did give him a representation, a detailed representation, mentioning the sections of the law which has been violated. But, and we also went to the State Biodiversity Board. When we went to the State Biodiversity Board was very cooperative. They sat with us, read the law, understood what was happening, and they confirmed that there is a violation, and they took all necessary steps to file a complaint with the NBA. And they followed it up regularly, but NBA again was very lax. In 2010 February was when we filed the complaint. In 2011 August was when they confirmed that they were going to take action against the Mahaiko and the Monsanto companies. Until then, they had not done anything. And again, this was because of pressure and, calling them up every now and then and speaking to their officers, writing repeated letters. Only that pushed them to come to this conclusion. And this was also confirmed by our environment minister at the parliament, where when parliamentarians asked her, she confirmed that they will be taking action and see that it will, go to a logical end. But I won't go into the law part. Yeah, but what happened recently was just a week back, the State Biodiversity Board was directed by the NBA to take action against the companies Mahaiko and Monsanto. The State Biodiversity Board had its meeting as usual, and there were 2 members who had never come for any other board meeting, and they were present in this last meeting that was held, and they strongly voted against taking any action, because they think that taking any action against Monsanto and Mahiko will send wrong signals to foreign direct investments, especially to the biotech companies that are in Bangalore. And also right now there is a biotech conference that is happening in Bangalore. So that kind of tells you the pressure that is coming from the biotech industry. And the person who voted against taking action was none other than our additional Chief Secretary for Agriculture. So an important thing is this year India is hosting the CBD in Hyderabad in October. And we are, preparing for it in a lot of enthusiasm. And what is important is the logo. The logo says Prakriti Rakshita Rakshataha, and it has a tiger on top, a dolphin below, a bird, and a woman with grains. Given that most of our agriculture farmers are women and they're basically small-time farmers, what we put here on the logo is very different from what is happening in practice. Because most of the organic farmers are small-time farmers who have recently changed and moved away from the pesticide kind of farming, the dirty farming. So do we really mean what we say when we are opening such doors to the biotech industries? I'll stop here and maybe we can take questions. Any questions, comments?
What is the current position of British digital market in commercial perspective? What is the current position?
The moratorium is still in place, but there is a lot of pressure from the biotech industries, both at the center and the state, to push it ahead.
Initially, you talked about the natural resources where the inhabitants get a share of profit. Sir talked about it, and that's already implemented in my village. Like the sand mining, villagers get a percent share of the bidding amount. So when you give the villagers the incentive of money, the panchayat voted in favor of the mining. Even if they know that it would cause harm in the longer run. So would it be right in a sense like providing money incentive to the villagers, doesn't that allow exploitation of the natural resources by them?
I also said something else. I said it's a problematic relationship because in the 1992 CBD, the Access and Benefit Sharing Protocol effectively commodifies nature, right? It puts a value to it. And the negotiations on that value is still not concluded, 1992 to 2012, and we still don't know how to value it. So in Hyderabad, a major question that is going to come up in the CBD negotiations is what is the rate at which we distribute the profits, okay? Once you commodify and monetize a natural resource, you're tearing at the very culture and the fabric of farming systems. Because if you look at the way in which our agriculture has been practiced over thousands of years, there are two concepts. One is that seed is sovereign. Seed sovereignty is actually a concept which is at the base of the right to life actually. It cannot be commodified. You can give it to somebody. It's a gift. You know, when you celebrate Yugadi, there are 9 grains that are exchanged. Now, what is the symbolism behind it? That you actually fertilize or cross-fertilize fields by exchanging seeds across great distances. So you build a certain resilience, vibrancy to crop productivity, but you don't put a money to it, right? So this is a culture on which agriculture has thrived. Women is a repository of all the knowledge. Woman is a repository of knowledge as well as the grain in the family, not the men, okay? When you get into access and benefit sharing, it takes away all these dimensions. In fact, one of the things that the Biological Diversity Act requires is that people's biodiversity register has to be developed in each and every area under the Biodiversity Management Committee. That means where there are Gram Sabhas, you have to have a people's biodiversity register. The idea being not only bioresources which are useful or documented, but also practices and knowledge associated with it are also documented. Why we came to this is because of patenting. Pharmaceuticals would come and find that, you use turmeric into, it helps develop antibiotic. It is an antibiotic substance. They found that if you put neem in toothpaste, you can get a certain kind of a resistance to bacterial infection. People have known it. Everyone knows it. Everyone does it. But when they commodified it, and they put neem and called it a toothpaste that is my toothpaste, and in fact neem got patented, basmati got patented, turmeric got patented, and so on. That's when people realize that, if you don't put an end to this, so to contain one wrong, you have to create another wrong. So we are caught in a very imperfect world. We can come out of it when nobody steals. But as long as people are there to steal, I think we are stuck with this. I'm not happy with it. And you're right, in Northeast we found that the village councils, which are very powerful institutions there, because of the tradition of village councils dominating decision making there, are manipulated by Uranium Corporation of India or a dam building National Hydro Corporation or oil rigging company, oil company. They go and they bribe the village council elders and bias them in favor of the decision, whereas the people don't even know. So these are all imperfect institutional mechanisms. So there is a danger that it can happen. The only way we can actually work around it is to build a lot of awareness. And we have a long way to go on that. Right? In fact, in terms of preparing this country for these challenges, we still have to do another 20 years of work and then open the doors. We have already opened the doors. And people are just coming and documenting it and taking it. I remember I was working on the golf course business about a decade and a half ago. Golf courses were being built quite a bit then and before. There was a conference on golf course development. And a bunch of those guys who came from agrobiotech companies, Cargill, Monsanto and others, they came for golf course. You know why? One of the most heavily researched crops is grass, turf grass. There's something like 16,000 golf courses in the US, some 8,000 golf courses in Japan, and golf courses everywhere else now, right? So sensitive is that grass that it is one of the most genetically engineered product in the world, right? People from the conference came to Lal Bagh. You know what they took away from Lal Bagh? Different tufts of grass. If I did that in the United States, the Port Authority would arrest me. I would be in prison. They just put it in their suitcase and took it away. You will find those grasses are documented there, spliced, analyzed, cross-analyzed, written about everything, probably patented also. If it is vetiver grass, which is a very strong binding agent for soil, excellent for building nutrition in the soil, and it gets commodified there. See, so these are all the problems, and it's really an imperfect. I remember arguing with Madhav Gadgil, who promoted this idea in 1990s, but we are stuck with it now. It's codified into law, it has become practice, and it has also now, and in fact, it has become a very difficult negotiating instrument in the CBD conference and parties. No easy answers there.
This is more related to your practice at a general level. You talked about corruption, you talked about those kind of minutes where, like open flouting of expected rules and is happening. How do you, as you go about doing this, when you know so many wrongs are happening that are just at basic level is just mind-boggling? What makes you keep going? I just want to understand, because we all are going to practice in the field. We are going to come up with, structures that, are blocking the way we think is the right thing or appropriate thing. What keeps you going? What makes you hopeful about it?
I'm constantly told I'm mad because all my contemporaries are heads of department in all the colleges in Bangalore, while we are struggling here to raise funds and, make ends meet. Well, it's the fact that somebody has to do, and you come out of college and you see so much of injustice happening around you. I think that is what drives me, at least.
Read an email I just got. It's a good answer, but this is a person trying to get a job with us. So I asked her to look at our website. a job, and she had sent an email, and we said, okay, you want a job, fine, but look at our website and figure out seriously, because a lot of people come for jobs, and they won't last 3 months, right? And often they leave saying that, we are terrible people, we don't pay well, and so on. So we didn't want to repeat that experience. And this is a woman called Monty Majid, and she says, I've gone through your website before writing to you. I had plans to pursue my PhD after my post-graduation, and I have written my NET exam this December too. But within this period, I worked on some research assignments, part-time and short-term, from which I figured out that I did not want to get stuck with working with data all my life. Also, I realized that in most of the places where they are hiring economic postgraduates for research, in quotes, it was only for cleaning some data, using some statistical packages, and arriving at some out-of-the-world figures and maybe producing some academic papers. I was greatly demotivated by this useless take on research. Maybe this is just another one of my misperceptions. Let me be really very honest with you. I have very less general awareness because till now in life I was busy trying to score marks and get a degree, which I realized does not have much use anyways. I want to be engaged in something which has some meaning and purpose, and where I can make a difference to at least one person. Now, she goes on, right? Now, you can come like this to a job, but you should stick like this in this job. Because you can't have, for me, I have a problem with this also, because it seems like she wants to make a difference. If you get into this sector and you say, I want to make a difference, and you don't see any difference, you get into frustration, right? Frustrating situation. So, you realize that you're not prepared by your educational system for the kind of jobs you do. So there are no easy answers. So I think it's a lot to do with your own internal examination. A lot of people who are talented have come and worked with us. But they have problems staying because finally there's the family, which has expectations, and there are huge loans because now college education has become super expensive. So they have to pay back. Many people say, I will come back to you. For instance, we need lawyers. In the last 10 years, no lawyer has come and worked with us. We had one lawyer who came and worked with us, and that's because he said, I don't want money. Okay, he's now doing a very interesting PhD. The point is, why the lawyers don't come is because they have these huge loans, and they become corporate partners. Then you get comfortable with the money. And then you don't know what you missed. Right? What questions you had. You lose the questions. So if you lose the questions, I don't think anybody can. I don't know if I'm explaining more than what I should, but it's an interesting question you ask because it also helps you guys. Because you're doing MA in development?
And education.
And education. It's a very relevant question. So if you come out and look for the kind of salaries in the software sector, in our sector, it's not that we don't want to give, we don't want to pay, but nobody pays us. In the last 15 years that we have worked in this sector, all this work that you see has been done without any money. And this is to protect the biodiversity of the future. This is the first major biopiracy case in the country. And against the biggest multinational. And not, I believe in Bangalore is a city of millionaires, right? Highest concentration of millionaires. We have not got a single millionaire calling us up and saying, you know what, I believe in this cause, I want to fund it. Okay? So that won't happen in India. So one of the best examples is to look at Tirupati and see what Tirupati gets and what this sector gets. No comparison whatsoever. You have to live with this reality. So,
As I there is a question. One more question. Go ahead.
I was asked about I come from an agricultural family, and I heard from my grandparents that per acre yield used to be 80 to 85 bags of paddy. But now, in spite of heavy inputs and fertilizers, we get around 8 to 10 bags. But still, even if we turn to organic farming, at the slightest hint of a disease or pest, the farmers turn towards this pesticides, pesticides, fungicides. So even if this is encouraged, how far it's going to be successful?
Organic farming is something that has been practiced in India much, much before Green Revolution came. And pests were there even then. The beauty of organic farming is they also use the biopesticides, the pesticides made from neem, turmeric, bitter gourd, variety of these plants that grow around us. And I have seen many farmers more recently change to organic farming. Initially, they'll try in half an acre, then they increase it to 1 acre. And slowly their productivity increases. It's just that people don't want to take risk because the green revolution kind of farming has become very easy because seeds are provided, fertilizers are provided, water is provided, and you just do a little bit of your work and sit comfortably, and then you get something. But little do they realize that in the long run it is very toxic, and it is not good for the soil, and the kind of water problems we're going to have in future, it's not going to be feasible to have that kind of farming. It is not something sustainable. Whereas organic farming, to shift will take some time, but once people shift, it is definitely far more sustainable, because in organic farming, we bring in a lot of our indigenous knowledge. If you visit an organic farm and talk to people out there, you will realize the kind of crops that they grow. They do a lot of mixed cropping. They change their sowing seasons, patterns, and even the weeds that grow in the organic farm are not discarded and composted or anything. Even from that, they either make medicines, they use that as basic nutrition at home. Many of the landless laborers who come and work on these farms, for them that's a basic nutrition. So that is far more sustainable. And they also have a lot of drought-resistant varieties, which we have completely forgotten today. In fact, the kind of millets that they grew in the past are no longer available today. If you see the market scenario, you see a lot of corn. Why are we seeing so much corn? Corn has kind of invaded even our traditional meals. Corn is not part of our traditional meal. But corn has found a place in the palau and everything, practically everything. The only thing I'm waiting to eat is a puran poli made out of corn. That is how these international companies are taking over. It's time to kind of awaken to that, stop that and say, no, I am going to do what my grandfathers taught me, because that is definitely more sustainable. See, another problem that we all have is anything that comes from outside is good. So just as how we embraced everything Western, we also embraced the farming technology and practices also. I don't know if that answers your question.
I just want to add two things. My teacher in ecology was my grandfather, was illiterate. Meaning he didn't have any formal education. So when we were kids and we were interacting with him, and he was a farmer, and there was no such thing as organic farming because he only did that. So there was no chip on your shoulder because you're an organic farmer. And this is 1980s. In Kannada, buddhi ban mele, they said, once I became sort of wiser, I started asking this very difficult question. I said, look, I read in this school book and this article and all that green revolution is coming and it is helping farm productivity. Soviet Union, do you remember the magazine? Yeah? It used to come free. Soviet land. If you open the magazine, half of it was all about green revolution technologies. Right? Though it was Soviet, it completely adopted those technologies. And we were getting it free. And we were like indoctrinated by the Soviet philosophy. Okay? And it would actually tell us that the way to go is to commodify, to actually use this biotech. The transgenics were not there yet. But biotech based on fertilizers and pesticides is the way forward. Otherwise, the world's population is too large, the world is going to end, and that sort of scenario. So using this argument against my grandfather, he told me something very simple. He says, in my own observation, I have seen a farmer who did this, and I wondered how we can cultivate it, because I know the soil takes a long time to make. And I told him that if you put this salt, it is salt. I said, they actually tasted these chemicals. So it's very salty. If you put this salt inside and you think it will grow, maybe it will grow, but I don't see how it is going to grow for a long time. He said in 3 years' time, his crop productivity went up and fell down. My grandfather's farm went on. Okay, it is still rich. They only take one crop. Right? My cousins went through a phase when, after my grandfather died, of using chemical fertilizer. Now they returned totally to organic. Okay.
But also, I want to give a second analogy. If you are a computer science student, you don't have to row. A lot of people are rowing the same direction, right? So it kind of, you just float with it. Because there's a whole movement which says be a computer science student. When we were kids, we had to be a mechanical engineer, civil engineer, or at best a doctor. Otherwise, you are nobody. Then it became computer science, okay? And biotechnology. Now even biotechnology is lost out, I believe. I don't know what are the technologies coming up. So I worry for you, right? You have chosen MA Education and Development Studies. I am sure you have a strength of character, but the world doesn't row for you. You're rowing against the tide. Same problem with organic farming. Okay? It was part of our culture. It was the way we cultivated. But once Green Revolution came in, it completely subverted the system. It hijacked the system. So you cannot become an organic farmer in isolation. You have to be part of a network today. Because you have to have your own niche markets. And unfortunately, the organic foods are more expensive. Good food has become more expensive. Spoiled food is cheaper, obviously, right? So, this has become the tragedy of our times. So, yes, we need to return, but it cannot just be 1% farmers returning 10%. It has to be substantial. And the good story is, Karnataka has a substantially large number of farmers who are returning. The third story I want to say, and there's the same UAS Dharwad, which actually got into this BT brinjal mess through biopiracy and all that. Another professor did a study. He found that farmers returning to organic farming, this came out just 2 months ago. By the 7th year, their productivity levels were far more than the ones who were going into either transgenics or hybridized crop rearing. Because they were able to tide over market fluctuations far better. They had a diverse bread basket. So there's a lot of richness with organic farming.
They realize, see, we did so many wrong, and they are coming into urban farming. They totally worried about right now, present generation. You are not realizing what the mistakes we have done and all those things. So they say, we want to tell you people, just go for urban farming. That is the best way. Your topic is, one of the topic is food security. So it is the best way to go for, best way for food security of.
We haven't got into that. That's the rest of the slide. We don't have time for it. Yeah.
There's a whole lot of confusion actually in the farmers' mind regarding organic farming and natural farming. I was interacting with the farmers in the Indian division and then Mysore division. There are a set of people who are propagating the idea of organic farming, and a set of people who are propagating the idea of natural farming. And the methodologies are completely different. And then this organic farming, nowadays it has become a marketing job for the MNCs also. The MNCs are into rhizobium production, there is a whole lot of vermicomposting production. So even if you are advocating for organic farming, again it is a profit for the MNCs, not for the farmer. So who are selling these organic products? So it's sold in the big malls, and then the networks which you are talking about, I have not seen the viability of these networks in the long run. Difficult challenges are there, to convince the farmers. Even the farmer, when they say that they are doing organic agriculture, it's like a hybrid agriculture. A bit of organic, inorganic, natural farming kind of thing. I don't know, I don't see a way out. The best thing is these universities, agriculture universities. I think we have 20 agriculture universities in India. Most of them do research, getting the fund from any of these MNCs and TLCs. The whole ideology of these agriculture universities are established for the green revolution thing. And there's need to revitalize these universities and then their ideology of thinking. Then only we'll be having some hopes. The whole argument is we need to change the agricultural education in our country. Then only there will be some hope. Otherwise, I don't see much hope in this.
Yeah, see, a lot of diversity is still there, yes. But the organic movement is slowly growing because I kind of engage with organic farmers and I see that every year a couple of organizations are really working hard to ensure that, the word spreads around. they are helping raise awareness among farmers. That is the biggest challenge. It will take a long time for people to get convinced. And while on one hand the state has backed out of filing, taking this case further, on the other hand the state has also backed a lot of organic farmers. Every year they spend nearly 200 to 300 crores on organic farming in the state itself.
That's why I'm having a problem. When they spend this 200 crores, it goes, most of the money goes in buying the vermicompost and the rhizobin inoculants from the remittances again. So they are not supporting the farmer, the local indigenous practices which were being practiced by the local communities.
No, that money is going to these organizations that are helping raise awareness, because I engage with one such where they are working with women farmers, especially.
It's a patchy story. I mean, you are right that it is a patchy story, but if you were trying to transform the universities, I would rather say go work with the farmers. If the consumer of that university is saying, I don't like your research, the university will change. So why you want to go and waste your time with these universities? Right? So that is exactly the type of movement which is taking place in India. Human societies react not in arithmetic or geometric proportions, right? Especially when it comes to movement building. There are sparks and they ignite. There is a general awareness that this kind of farming is collapsing. There is also distress in the farming sector. All it takes is that kind of a trigger which will collapse all these events which have led to the so-called success of biotech-based farming. And then people will realize that the only way you can go back is to actually talk about natural farming. Organic farming is now considered merely the absence of chemicals. It's actually far richer than that. Natural farming is much deeper philosophy. There are different traditions in it. So it's a totally different debate, but I agree with you that it is not very easy to see the light at the end of the tunnel yet.
Thank you so much. We can go on and on, because I was just sharing with them that I was in New York over the break to do some of my work, and I went to Occupy Wall Street, wanting to occupy, but all my friends reminded me how crazy I am that I should not, and good I didn't, because a lot of them got arrested. But the other day I did, next day I went and talked to them, and 4 of them have been occupying Wall Street from the day 1. And they asked me where I was from, why I was talking to them, and one of the things they brought up was Monsanto seeds issue. So the hope is to kind of in some ways answer my own question, is that it's not just people like you all who are heavily involved, but such issues are also known overseas that this is wrong. So that is something we can build on, and hopefully we can come again and continue our conversation. But thank you so much, and thank you all also for participating.